Hey, folks, everybody, welcome. And I would like to also welcome our hopefully five momentary. Here he is. Here's number five. I would like to welcome our panel of esteemed veterans
Hi,
of
John.
SPI.
Hey.
We have with us the ancient one himself, Mark Herman, even though he's not, as we've established in the pre-show conversation, the oldest person on this call. I, at a sprightly 29, am, of course, the youngest person on this call, which is totally familiar feeling at a wargaming event. We also have with us Eric Lee Smith, veteran of both SPI and Victory Games, John Butterfield, legendary game designers all, Frank Davis, who I have to shout out to doing the almost all of the work in setting this up, in fact, and Danny Parker, Mr. Bulge himself. So welcome everybody to the show, and let's make sure that we are broadcasting. Oh boy, we're not broadcasting. Now we're broadcasting. All right.
Okay.
So I'm saving over all of this stuff. So now we're live. So once again, I'd like to welcome everybody to the stream, both everybody who is here in the audience tonight, which nobody's picked up because we had some technical snags that were entirely my fault. And welcome our esteemed panel of folks from SPI. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So I'm going to kind of ask questions, but mostly I'm going to let these distinguished individuals do their own talking here. So Mark, I'll start with you since you're, probably the most active figure in kind of, on YouTube, right? On here, aside from me, of course, that you've been on my show and you've been on Dan's show and you've been on everybody's shows. So, when did you start at SPI, which of course started in 1969?
Yeah, so I got to SPI September 1st of 1976. I was just pretty fresh out of college, and my first job there, I was the receptionist. I was the front desk guy for about my first month there.
Okay. Eric, how about you?
I got there as a volunteer playtester in August of 1978, and I volunteer playtested on Richard Berg's Shiloh game. It was the first game I playtested, and I got to be I was a good tester, so I got in demand. So I got to playtest a bunch of games, and I got a minimum wage job in the summer of '79. Just working for Redmond and just doing stuff around the office. And one of the things that everybody does is every issue they'd always ask, does anybody have any feedback, game suggestions? So I wrote one up like everybody else did, John, everybody. And mine got voted in. And I went up to Jim Dunnigan and I said, Jim, the Alamo got voted in. Who's going to design it? And Jim looked up at me and said, well, who wrote the request? I said, well, I did. He said, well, then you are. I went, I am? So that was my introduction to SPI.
We had faith in you, Eric.
Yeah. Always had faith.
Yeah.
Into the fire. I don't recommend anybody choose as their first game design one where one side is wiped out to the last man. That's not a good situation.
So anyway, John, what about you? When and how did you get started at SPI?
Well, I actually had a stint working in the shipping department in 1973 and 74, but then I wasn't really a game designer then at all. It was a part-time job. But then I actually started there in 70, started playtesting and doing a little bit of work in 77 and went on staff in 78. Yeah.
What was your first design with SPI?
I designed, well, my first actual design was Rostov. It was one of the 4 games in the Army Group South Quad. But my first
good game
actual project there was developing Danny's game, Battles for the Ardennes, which was just an awesome experience all around.
Frank, let's hear from you. What, when and how did you get started at SPI?
I got there when they only had the letters SP. Seriously, I started working there in about August of 1971, but I had been playtesting there since the previous autumn. And the reason I was all of a sudden living at SPI was my girlfriend was going to school at School of Visual Arts, which was right down the street. So both of us eventually wound up working at SPI. And like Mark, the first thing I did is I worked in shipping. And what was interesting there is I remember there was no heat, there was no air conditioning, and at times there was no light. and we were packing the games.
Was this at 44 East 23rd?
It was on 23rd.
Yeah, it was East 23rd. I don't know the exact street number.
All right.
I did post a picture last night of what I think is the original office, both exterior and interior. And there's a group picture of Dunnigan and a few other people who are the real founders of the company. That was in 1972 in the old office. I don't know if any of you had been working at the old office, the one that was in the middle.
I went there as a kid to buy a phalanx. It was so the office that we all came from was, I think,
23rd,
34 East 23rd. You guys, the office that was before that was at 23 East 20, West 23rd, which is just down the block from there. And then there was an earlier one that was like in an apartment basement somewhere of Dunnigan's, I think.
That was on 14th Street. That was in 69. Anyhow, I was just going to say one of my focuses is to try and let people know a little bit more about what SPI was like at that stage. So let's hear from Danny.
Danny, I think you're muted. There you go.
So I was kind of like a welcome interloper, and being a one-trick pony, I had written feedback similar to what Eric was describing, where I said, hey, let's do a quadri game on the Ardennes, and basically got the information back from Dunnigan that, hey, why don't you do that?
Right. So, be careful what you ask.
I'm remote. I'm not there. Come on up. So, I came up in 1977, and I found like I said, I was an outsider, but I found the place just kind of fascinating because there are a lot of, it seemed like really smart people, and yet a really strange place because there were the playtesters on Friday, for instance. That was kind of like an event. I'm curious about other people's thoughts and feelings about that, but I found that pretty unusual. And like a Campaign for North Africa, I came on definite. I would come months later again, and it would still be a lot of the same people.
Yeah.
Don't touch it anyway, and then
they didn't go home.
They did, I don't know.
They didn't bathe either.
And you could go out to eat something and come back at 2 a.m. They were still there. So
I was for a while I was the 7th Armored Division commander.
We should back up a second, Gary, and say something here about SPI's shipping department.
Apparently, we should.
That was the most overqualified shipping department in the history of the United States. I'm telling you. At any given time on 23rd or on Park, it would be manned by people like Joe Balkowski and Mark Herman and John Butterfield and me and whoever. And they never made a single error of the packing of the box. Never. But they moved across the river when they moved the office, when they moved the shipping department across the river.
Disaster.
That was not true anymore.
Just so you know, so there was this guy who was in charge of assembling the games. His name was Carl.
Yeah.
And I used to go to Carl all the time and say, Carl, I need this counter sheet, whatever. He would just walk out and hand it to me. And then this goes on for about a year. And then one day I go ask for another component, whatever it was. And all of a sudden he gives it to me. I go, Carl, this isn't the right component. He goes, God damn those kids, they didn't put things in the right place. He was blind. The guy in charge of assembly was blind. I mean, just to give you, and I ran into Carl years later. He was running a newspaper stand near the New York Times once, and I was down there, and I looked up at the area he was, but he was amazing. I mean, and I didn't know for a year that he couldn't see. It's crazy.
Yeah, Sal and Carl. Sal
Sal was the
Yes,
Packer.
Salzito.
The Packer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were like leading things there. Yeah.
Salzito was an ex-con,
Well, a lot of ex-cons there.
and he had a very curious outfit in the summer. In the summer, he would wear just undershorts with a plastic raincoat.
It was a strange crowd.
And he was in charge of shipping, which is why Eric said it was a strange place. They were smart people, but they were strange.
Well, and I have distinct memories of walking back there and seeing Balkowski packaging boxes to be shipped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we all did that, I think.
Well,
Yeah,
I ran when I got there. I was running the sales over the front desk, and I answered the phones and all this, and that's how that was my first job there, right out of after I stopped being a tree guy.
Yeah.
So
I guess-
I mean, there was
Gary, but Gary, I
Go
want to say, to get to the heart of SPI, we got to get on to Redmond and Jim.
So
Really
I mean, they are on the list of.
We can take up hours on that.
Well, I talk to Jim regularly. I still have lunch with Jim, and he seems to be less interested in interviews these days. I'm just telling you. I mean, I sent him a couple of requests. He just he's nice about it. He tells the people he doesn't want to do it, and so I don't know if we can get him on. But I see him. I'm having lunch with him and Al, I think in about another month.
I mean, what was it like to work with folks like the folks that aren't here, right? Like Jim Dunnigan and Redmond Simonson, and I mean, Al Nafi's not here either, but I know Al's still around.
Oh yeah, Al lives in Brooklyn again. He's back from Texas.
Am I correct in saying that nobody on this meeting right now still lives in New York City? Oh well, there you go.
Yeah, I live in Albuquerque, but I can start off. So I worked with Redmond obviously at SPI, and then after he left the game business, he moved to Texas, and in that period, he became very close to my family. I had him over for family parties and Thanksgiving, so I had a long relationship with Redmond all the way up until his death in the 90s, and so he and I were very close. Because I went to art school, and John Butterfield went to art school, and Redmond went to art school, we kind of got, I think, little bit of a different experience of Redmond than some of the other people. Now, he was a game designer too, but he loved to talk about art and design and type and color and structure and layouts and all that stuff, right, John?
Yeah. It was kind of constant interaction with him and bouncing ideas off.
Absolutely.
And so I used to have weird hours for a variety of personal reasons. So I used to get there at noon and leave at midnight. That was my working hours. And Redmond, everybody here knows this. Redmond slept in the office 4 or 5 nights a week. He had a bed in his office. He slept in there. And so I was often in his office like around 10 o'clock at night, and I would talk about game design with him. And I learned a lot. I mean, these guys went to art school. I didn't go to art school, but I was the one who actually used to run the stat machine for the art department. He taught me how to use the stat. That's like making photographs. And I used to make he would call me and I used to do all the stat work for him. But he and I used to talk. He really taught me how to use graphics to alleviate procedures. In other words, put it on the map or put it in a chart that you can see easily on the map or a track, and then you don't have to have a lot of rules about it. Make it more, user friendly. So it's the interface. Make the game map part of the interface. Which if you look at some of my games, I tend to put a lot of stuff on the maps, which the Euro guys hate, but I love. And some of my best designs are like you don't ever have to look away from the map because it's all in front of you all the time.
Yeah, I mean, look at John Butterfield's D-Day game, right, John? Your D-Day game has like everything on the map, right?
D-Day, you mean my recent one?
Yeah, the D-Day games. Your invasion games.
Well, certainly my design has been greatly influenced by Redmond, and see at SPI, Redmond didn't just stay in the art department. He wandered around in a great way, and so his influence on the design of the game would begin in the early stages, and his mentoring on game design also. So it was great just to be able to walk down the hall anytime and just show him something, even if it was months Well, I guess at SPI, weeks away from the art department.
What was that?
Yeah.
What was that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Jim Dunnigan was also very approachable. He always intimidated me a little bit.
I think
Because
he intimidated
Jim
a lot
was-
of people.
He was very, very bright, and he was kind of quiet and introverted and stuff, but you could go into his office and chat with him. And I got to develop his bulge game with him, and he was very indulgent with me on that. And it turned out really well. It's still in print, actually. It's back. The beautiful new versions just come out with the original rule book back. It's great. So that's in print now for 40 years, or more than 40 years.
So the thing
but
about Jim, though, was he was a straight shooter. Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had pissed him off, he would come to you and tell you have pissed me off, and you didn't piss him off twice, just to be clear.
Yes. No.
You get
absolutely
fired.
true.
So, and he was very straight, but he's definitely not a passive aggressive guy. Let me put it that way. He's the exact opposite.
Well, the thing about Jim that I'll never forget was walking in and watching him designing Next War, and it was on a map like this big, and I said to him, I said, Jim, well, I thought you were working on Next War. He said, this is Next War. Well, so what's that? I said, well, that's the area around Berlin. I said, well, he said, if I can get Next War working here, I can scale it up.
Well,
He
I mean,
did stuff like that just changed the way you view the world. From that point on, I never did a whole huge map to start. I did a section. If you can get it working on an 8.5 by 11 section, well, just do it that, he did stuff like that.
I want to just
mind blowing.
I want to just chime in, like, although I didn't know it at the time, now 50 years later, I recognize that Jim was probably one of the most influential people in my whole life. Like Eric was saying, Jim was a difficult person. He was pugnacious. When he talked, he sounded a little like Popeye. But he used to tell us things like, that I still remember to this day. I was looking, as I said, last night online, and I found this old clip of Dunnigan in 1972. And the way he starts off the whole clip is he says, I used to be the smartest kid in the room wherever I went, and all like that. And he said, and then I eventually found out that was only true until I got into a room with a bunch of wargamers. And he said, and once I was in with wargamers, I was no longer the smartest kid in the room. Now, we have a lot of smart kids in this room, but I just want to say Dunnigan was a huge influence on me personally, on all of us as designers. And to some extent, Dunnigan had a way of thinking about things strategically. And I don't mean that he wasn't interested in tactics at all, but he always seemed to have either the big picture, like a big picture about like the military, or a big picture about like the types of games we should make. He's also famous for that line, the different strokes for different folks. And that's such a thing that's influenced me over the years. He believed that you could design a game about anything and that people would buy it. And the industry we have now, which is phenomenal, it's just phenomenal how big it's grown, how varied the titles are and the subjects, how many designers they are. To some extent, that started with Dunnigan because he said Avalon Hill is not doing enough. They're not producing enough product. There's a much bigger market to be tapped in. There's a much bigger research area to explore. And I still admire him so much for having that attitude. And I really think people need to recognize those games look primitive, but most of the things we wrestle with to this day were being discussed and being explored in 1972 at SPI.
The thing about
the Dunnigan story. My first day on I was on the front desk. I just got into SPI. I think I'd already pissed off Frank a few minutes before.
That's true.
And Dunnigan comes out. I had never met him before. I actually had met him once before, but he comes out and he goes, "Look, I got a task for you, but before I give you the task, I want to explain to you that it is not an accident that the word dead is in the word deadline." I was like, oh, wow. That was the first thing he ever said to me.
Well, Frank, one reason I like your games is that Dunnigan's influence is there to me, because what Dunnigan did was he'd do a game and he would always focus on the central matter, right? So he'd oftentimes leave out a lot of terrain would be abstracted and it'd be very simple, right? But you'd end up seeing Frederick the Great to me as a direct descendant from the way Jim Dunnigan approached game design, the essential game design, right? World War I is a classic example, right, John? You and I played that in Victory Games office one day. I still remember being beaten.
Oh, that's a great game. The folio size World War I.
Yeah, and it's a genius. It's a genius work. It's a genius
work.
Game.
The best design in my mind.
It's a genius work.
Mark, what'd you say?
Battle for Germany, I think, is my favorite design.
Yeah.
Also still in print after all these years.
Well, actually, it got copied by that other company. They kind of stole it. Didn't even give them credit for it. That the one with the blocks. Somebody, the Race for Berlin or something it's called. And they didn't even give him credit, but they literally took his game and just put it.
The decision version is very good. I recommend it. Really good.
I like the original. The original's great.
It's the original. It is the original, basically. It's really unchanged. It's really good. But
that technique, by the way, for John Carter of Mars. That's what John Carter of Mars is based on Battle for Germany.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, remember in that game, you're either one of the heroes and you're also a bad guy. So the bad guy is opposing the other heroes while you're a hero trying to oppose the other bad guy. So that's exactly the technique I stole from.
See, that's Dunnigan.
Yeah,
so Dunnigan would go, "Oh, Battle for Germany. Oh, we have to do this two-front thing." That's what I'm talking about. The essential thing. That's Dunnigan at the most pure.
He also had the ability to innovate. He was totally open to ideas about what games could be, but that they don't have to be like the same. And I worked on some of his games that were sort of really, really different, like Russian Civil War.
Oh,
and Wolfpack was one of the first solitaire games and all. And Mark has talked about this online before. The thing about Dunnigan, another thing that people should understand is he had a different approach to design than me. I'm like a jeweler. I carve every facet. I work on it for years. The game I'm working on right now, I started in 1982 and it's still not finished. And well, anyhow, Dunnigan was the opposite. Dunnigan would have what he called a game design on one sheet of paper. And on the back was the CRT and all. And then he would just say he would sit there, he would be playing with another person if you were the developer. And Dunnigan would sit there and say try and go here and see what happens and all like that. And then he would say usually within 10 minutes, he would say he's got to change the CRT. And to a large extent, the CRTs drove his games. And that's when you say he had one central idea, he wanted to have a game that wasn't too complicated, but that could produce realistic results. And the CRT was a big part of that. I am still not a designer like him. I still wallow in information for years, and all like that. But he moved so fast. He was so innovative. He covered so much ground. That's something. It's like Tom Brady. Very few people are going to match that, except maybe Mark.
Well, the Battle for Germany game took Dunnigan from start to finish a week. Yeah. And he left out the supply rules. Again, it's just not intuitive that you don't need supply rules in a World War II game. You don't need them. Everybody's in supply. So don't put them in.
Well, you got to remember something also. There's a big distinction, and again, I did Next War, remember, and Dunnigan gave me, I got a CRT, one piece. There were 3 pieces of paper. One had a CRT, one had sort of like a bunch of different kinds of units and what their numbers would be, and then I had a piece of paper with some notes, and he gave me an atlas. So and that was pretty much it. And but the big thing there was the continuous movement. In other words, he wanted to show once these guys attack, you could burn movement points and just gain fatigue, but you could really push yourself over the edge if you wanted to for this big attack. And that was the central theme of the game, this big, gigantic, invasion of the West. And, it worked, but it was, like I said, the design piece I learned from him. It's just like Eric says, I do most of my games. It's a piece of paper, and I can do it in one day, 2 days max, and I'm playing. But the development is finishing a game is a lot more than that. That's just all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's a shitload more than that.
He gave that over, General.
Yeah,
That's
Tom,
right.
Tom Shaw
but
from
he-
Avalon Hill said the last 10% of the game requires 90% of the work.
Right.
That's right, man.
And
So
it
the
is,
only
that is the
project
case.
I worked on with Jim Dunnigan was the Central Front series. I was the developer on that, and it was, prior to that, I had, staff designers and former staff designers saying, "Oh yeah, you'll do fine here, but then when you develop a game for Jim, you'll get fired." But that did not turn out to be the case at all. I loved working with Jim. We got along great.
Yeah.
And
Well,
but
the
his
three of us
design
survived, right?
part-
survived.
what'd you say?
And Jim was only kind to me relative. I mean, I never saw that side of things.
But you weren't a staff guy. You were, you didn't.
Yeah, I wasn't a
your
staff
salary.
guy. So I didn't have the dead end deadline, but
Yeah, exactly.
But
Well,
getting
I
back to the
think
idea of a
by the
core
way-
concept. Oh, sorry, Mark.
No, John, please. I didn't.
Yeah. So in the Central Front series, he had this idea of friction points, the idea that just operating could cause as much wear and tear on units as combat. And so the friction point system had you losing points and wearing out, for a variety of things. And that was the concept. And he had a CRT around that. And like Mark said, he handed me an atlas of Central Germany and saying, here, that this is going to be the first game in a series. That was his concept. And he said, and it's going to, here, they're going to go through the Fulda Gap. And so do this for the first issue. And then ended up generating, I think, 5 games, 3 by SPI and 2 by,
I remember I picked up when I came back to SPI the second time. I picked up the series. I did BAOR and some the North Cap or something like that.
Hofgap.
Yeah, and Charles Camps helped with Hofgap.
Yeah. Well, he was
Bruce
the
Maxwell
designer.
helped with BAOR.
I was the developer. He was the designer of those other, the remaining ones of the series. I was the one doing the inside stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, but just to say, get to feed onto your point, friction points is like a dotted line back to next war with the Fatigue.
Yes.
It's
really a change in scale.
Different, but it was the same idea between the 2 games.
Yeah, in Fifth Corps it was Soviet regiments and Western battalions, and in Next War it was like a scale up from that.
Right. Well, it's another level up, but it was. Well, I tell you, Next War for me though was probably the most significant design of my career because that's what got me a job in Washington in the Pentagon, and so that's what really took me in a different direction in my life. But that was the game that sort of got me noticed, as it were.
I consider them my whole career. I worked for years in software, and I worked briefly for a defense contractor, like writing manuals for submarines, launching nuclear weapons and all. But all of it came from the grounding I got at SPI. And what Mark said earlier about a deadline, that was one of the most important things I learned, even though I always missed my deadlines and all like that. But the point was, people say SPI was not run like a good business. And that's true. They lost money on every game they sold. But as a magazine publisher, they were practically the best that there's ever been in this industry. And they made their deadlines, and they did it with a very skeleton crew. I was going to say at the start, another thing people don't realize is Jim Dunnigan and Redmond Simonson began this, and it was pretty much just the 2 of them. And within a year, Dunnigan said, we got to publish a game every 2 months. We got to publish a magazine every 2 months. Then we got to publish a game in every magazine, And I realized, I came in 71, I realized I had no trouble getting a job because Jim was so overworked. The place was scary, with the amount of stuff. And he was doing 80% of it himself. He hired me to be another writer on S&T and all. And I wrote a whole bunch of articles in like a space of 2 years, like it was exhausting, like, and all like that. But you learn so much, like, and all like that from that experience.
Well, Frank, I want to
years,
step in
I
here
did
for just a
18
second
games.
to
2.5
contradict you
years
about
I
the
did 18
games. Some of the games made vast amounts of money. Next War was the second most profitable game SPI ever did after the Lord of the Rings game. And it made, I mean, I saw the numbers. We had the numbers, right? And there were a lot of games made a lot of money. The problem was at the very towards in my era, they decided to cut the prices and go cheap and try to do $5, $8 games. That was the decision that destroyed the company. We can debate that, but it's really not debatable.
Well, wait, one thing.
But you know, Danny Parker's game made a lot of money. I've seen the numbers on Danny Parker's game. It made a lot of money. It was profitable for sure.
Everybody knows, and everybody here knows this. So when you had a project, you got a budget. Like, so an S&T game had, I don't know, $2,000 or whatever the budget was, and you had a time card, and every hour that you charged for the game got charged against the budget. And if I went over to like David Isby was famous. If I asked David Isby a question, I got charged an hour. It didn't matter. So I stopped looking into it for 2 years because it was too expensive to ask him a question.
Isby was a lot of fun to talk to, though.
Oh yeah, we're going to start on Isby.
He became a lawyer. You know, he was already charging by the hour even then. And so when you had and for me, what happened was, and you guys were talking about the schedule for S&T. So S&T went to a thing called a web press, which is how they make newspapers or big magazines. And we had a slot that was pre-done where they got a good rate. And those galleys had to be on that web press at exactly that moment where all the penalty charges came in. And Jay Nelson was doing Highway to the Reich, and he fell horribly over budget and behind and all this stuff. And then IRAD came in to me and said, look, Jay's got all these S&T games and they have to be on schedule. So you're tagged. And that's all those early S&T games I did was because they needed somebody to get them done. Like you say, they had to be, you know, and I remember one funny story is that there was a woman named Peggy who was like she's one of the managers, and she was, you know, a nice, smart lady. And for whatever reason, the guy used to pick up the mechanicals to take him to the web press was kind of sweet on her. She was married even, and so anytime we needed more time, we would send Peggy to the front desk to kind of schmooze him up for a while. We could usually buy like about an hour of her going, "Ooh, hi." This kind of stuff.
So I want to say something here about productivity. So I went, SPI was the first job I really ever had, and it was this massively productive company. And it came from two people, Jim, which we've heard a lot about, but Redmond was unbelievably productive. And Redmond, if he had to do something the second time, first time, okay, second time, okay, third time would be the last time he would ever do something, because he would set up a system so he never had to do it again. And over the years, he created all these ways, like he got tired of designers going over budget on the rules too length. So he created this thing that you had to type, and it was an 80 lines across and 24, and you were given a budget of 70 pages. And if you didn't get it in 70 pages, tough. That's just one example. So I graduated from SPI and went into software development. I spent the rest of my life doing that. And I always thought, oh, well, software's got to be efficient. It was astoundingly inefficient. I couldn't believe how primitive software development companies, I'm talking big operations too, and their specifications were a joke.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I worked with programmers when object-oriented programming was popular, and everything had to be redesigned from scratch, and consequently, it would take years to get any product out. Like, you know, SPI was the opposite. SPI was like a lightning storm, and all. I do want to say something about Redmond and some of the other folks. First of all, I want to say, like, you know, I tried to get a number of people here. We're just a small representative of the group of people who work there, and there are many more I just want to mention. When I started, and well, the SPI consisted of Jim, Redmond, John. John came later. Al Nelfi, Dave Isby, and a guy named Fred Schachter, who
Oh.
also has designed some games. There were those five, and there was me. Then there were a bunch of auxiliaries who were tremendously important, like, Robert Champer is one. He was like the first A-class playtester in the world, I think, and all. And then they had a high school there called Xavier, and there were a whole bunch of people who used to come in from Xavier and play test on Friday night. The two ones that I worked with a lot, who I still think were tremendously talented, was Tom Walczyk and Ed Curran.
Yeah.
And all. And then I also want to say there's also a bunch of other designers who I would have loved to have join us. Ardwulf sort of said, "Don't press your luck. Don't push this too far. We don't even know if we'll have an audience for this show." But all the other people that should be on in the show and should be on a later show and all, they include Kevin Zucker, Joe Bukowski, Greg Kostikian, Eric Goldberg, and
Nick Karp, Jerry Klug.
Yeah, and people wrote to me and said, "Well, why isn't this person going to be on?" It was just like we had a size limit for the room, and all like that. And I also want to bring one more person's name to light, because I think there's a lot of things that people can say about him. Rich Berg.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rich Berg was another very productive designer. Amazing.
Ordinary.
Amazing guy.
Yeah, and as you guys know, I was close to him the rest of his life. He and I were very close.
We could spend an entire episode just on Berg. The thing about Berg that I remember when I was first there and I was a play tester, and I came up to him and I said, "Listen, Richard, why is this 8th Texas Regiment here a 6 and not a 7?" And he said, "Because I'm the game designer and I say it's so." And I never forgot that. And for the rest of my adult life, when I get questioned about one of my designs in software or whatever, the basic answer is because I'm the game designer and I say it's so.
I wrote that this morning to some guy. Some guy was telling me, like, "Well, why is it like this?" I go, "That's the way I want it."
Exactly. That's the Berg answer. The Berg answer.
That's what I wanted. Oh,
Now, we can talk about difficult personalities. There are some difficult personalities. John Prados is not an easy personality to deal with. Richard Berg was not an easy personality to deal with.
Well, depends, your perspective.
Yeah, there were different ones that, had different, Now, Richard Berg was fun. He was hilarious.
It was a little like West Side Story working at SPI, I always had intellectual problems with a lot of my fellow designers, and Rich Berg was one of my key, not a rival. He was much more productive than me, but Rich Berg was the master of what I call flavor, and all. He wanted the game, if it was going to be about pirates, then it was going to have someone with a parrot on their shoulder and all like that. And his games, they were just full of minute details that I probably would have left out, but they were very, very evocative of the subject matter and the period, So sort of the opposite of what you said, Eric, about Dunnigan, that Dunnigan would focus on one thing. Rich would focus on the flavor or the theme or the entertainment side of the game.
That's exactly. Berg always thought about the entertainment before he thought about the simulation.
Well, the thing about Berg I learned from Richard Berg the most was, I know a lot of game designers, including the guys here on this call, but I've never met a game system person, a person so obsessed about game systems as Richard Berg. If you got him in a room and start talking about game systems, there was no end to how long that conversation could go on. And it was always fascinating to hear him. And he played everything and he knew everything. And he was just, and Butterfield, by the way, has got certain, talking to John was a close second, because John is also a very systemish type guy. And it's like, wow, but to hear Berg just sort of, and he would come up and say, what's the system? What are you working on? What's the system? That's his first question. What's the system? Right, Mark?
One of my first playtesting experiences before I was on staff was testing the War of the Ring game.
Oh God.
that Rich Berg designed. And I was a huge Tolkien, still am, fan and aficionado, and you know, into researching it all. And I was so blown away by that design because Rich Berg put everything in it. He made it a Tolkien lover's dream and fun to play, and had two scales going on of characters and armies, and I think a lot of SPI designers
Genius.
took a lot from the breadth and the depth of that design that was all about telling a story. It was great.
Frank, this is my wife, Carol. He's got a wife, Carol, also.
Oh, hello,
Hi,
Frank.
Carol.
Carol. Down in
Eric.
Cocoa Beach.
Hi, Eric.
Hi.
Everybody
Mark, I thought that was your daughter. That's not your daughter. Mark?
Oh my God.
Thanks. Talking.
Dang.
My daughter's a blonde.
Yeah. All right, have fun. Bye.
I think one thing I want to mention now, I just want to mention, I'm very interested in the people who have influenced me as game designers and in many other ways and all. And two of those people are here. Two of the best game designers who have never, ever lived are in this panel. And John Butterfield is like an amazing person in terms of like pushing the idea of solitaire games and all, which are now one of the most important aspects of our whole industry and all like that. But the amount of brain work that has to go into a good solitaire game, especially the kind that John has been doing, is just staggering, like and all. I'm just starting to work on one solitaire module for a game, like and all, and I stole whatever idea I could from John and all, and it sort of works. I mean, like and all, but he really is like the founder of that, the same way Dunnigan is the founder of like the simulation and all like that. And John's probably done a lot of other things, but I'm very a fan of his solitaire work. The other person I was going to point out is Mr. Herman, my rival in the Origins baseball game in 1978. Mark, when you came, you mentioned earlier that Frank was not too happy about something that day. When you first came, I said, "Oh God, are we going to have people like Mark here working here, like and all like that, and all?" I thought that the man was like, just that there was nothing underneath there and all like that. And so I just want to say, I was so wrong. I am so shocked, like and all like that, by what you've done in this industry and all. I'm talking about a person, I call myself the least prolific designer in history. And Mark is probably one of the best and one of the most prolific designers. And I think he's going to influence people both John and Mark are going to influence people for years in the future, the same way Dunnigan influenced me.
Well, I thank you, Frank. I would tell you a funny, I like telling stories and everybody knows that. So there was this guy from the Village Voice came, remember the guy who did the cartoon?
Stan Mack.
Stan Mack.
Stan Mack.
And there is a panel, Frank. You and I were working on our Purple War module, and there's a panel, and it's a characters you and I had a beard then, and me, and you're saying to me, don't forget about the Belgians, and I'm said to say, don't worry, they'll die. So we made the panel together. I still have it. It's hysterical.
Yeah, that's a great cartoon.
It is.
And everybody in the cartoon
there.
is recognizable. Richard Berg's there, and Eric Goldberg's there, and
I might be cool that
Zucker's
Rick
there.
Goldberg, everything he said was like in capital letters, in big. He was always loud. He was a very loud teenager back in the day.
Do you guys ever feel like that you want to take a break, or that that the pace of the design and the amount of games you guys have created? Do you ever feel like that I might have done something else?
Well, I did do something else.
No, Mark is saying.
I had no other talents, not like John. He could do other stuff. I couldn't.
Well, Mark, you were a partner at America's largest defense contracting firm in America. So you had an intense job.
A mere side job.
And I know you, Mark. And what you do is you get up every morning at 7 o'clock, go to your desk at home, work for 2 hours on your game, go to work, come home, have dinner, work, and Saturdays with all games, and that's how you did it, right? You did it like that.
Well, the most important thing though is the girl who came in here, 44 years later, she hasn't left me yet. So I guess she lacks imagination, or she was happy not to talk to me. I'm not sure which.
Yeah. Well, again, the productivity of Mark Herman is astounding. The productivity of John Butterfield is also, it's something to share an office with him. Here's what John does. He has these notebooks, like he went to art school, so he carries a notebook and he draws in it. And the guy has a notebook for each game, and he'd write his notes in there. And then one day he would open his notebook and start typing on our Smith Coronas, and he would just go from notebook. He'd look at a page, type, look at a page, type, go to the Xerox machine, Xerox a chart or an example, paste it onto a page, and it was this astounding productivity to watch John Butterfield design a game. Greg Kostikian, you guys remember Greg? Oh my God. I was early on there, and he was doing a game. It's probably Barbarian Kings or something. And he borrowed somebody's office. He borrowed Balkowski's office, and he went in there, and I swear to God, he's the fastest typer I've ever seen.
He types as fast
words
as
a minute, easy. I mean, and he literally did a brain dump from his brain onto manuscript paper, and he had a game from start to finish in a day and a half. It was intimidating. And it's a good game.
I would say I know John well. I know you, Eric, and we all work together also at Victory. I think that one of the just thinking out loud, one of the skills is the ability to sit for like 8 hours and just go straight from page 1 to page X in one shot, just to get it down once, and then you can work on it. But I've seen both of you guys do it. And, we were sat in the same office together for years.
My Civil War game, start to finish, was 2 weeks.
Yeah, I was. Remember, your desk was next to mine. Remember, and by the way, when I did the Gold Strike rules, because we had that short deadline, so down in Monarch Avalon, there was a typesetting machine like over there, and there was a desk here. And Gold Strike, I wrote the page, finished the manuscript page. I'm still in the middle of the rule. I would go like this. Ryer would grab it and put it right into the typesetting machine, and we went to press like that. I've never really gotten any rules questions, so it was a good set of rules, but it was all stream of consciousness right from 2 days.
Mark mentioned Ryer, which is Bob Ryer, for those of you who don't know, and he was another instrumental part of the SPI process in editorial management, and also
he was critical to Victory Games.
I don't remember when he started at.
I do.
He was already there when I arrived. And
no, he got there. So I started September 1st. I was on the front desk for the first month, and about 3 weeks in, so sometime in like late September, he got hired as an editor. And they took me off the front desk, and my first roommate was Bob Ryer. We were roommates from day one when he got there, like around October. He got there like around October 1st of 1976.
Mm-hmm.
A great guy, very, very, very funny. Oh my God!
Well, he's funny in a very like Vermouth is to a martini. He's very dry humor.
He's got the most cutting sense of humor I've ever encountered.
Oh, yeah.
I remember him. My first encounter with Bob Ryer was him coming into my office and putting some of my Alamo manuscript on my typewriter and going, "Smith, it's withdrawal phase, not withdrawal. You can't even type without a Texas accent." Because I'd misspelled it with withdrawal, right? It's like, and that was my first professional encounter with Bob Ryer. You can't even type without an accent, you cracker, or whatever you call me. Oh my God.
I have another topic that I can't not talk about. This is it's like two-sided question. One is, what the hell is it about war games that interests us? And the second question is, where does research fit in your guys' lifestyle and work? I can answer the question first of all. The research is the whole reason I'm here. I was interested in military history when I was 8 or 9 years old. I started designing games. I was born pretty close to the end of World War II, so I was like, it was in the culture when I was growing up, like, and all like that. And I heard Mark say this on another show. I love reading military history. And what I love more than that, which might get at the question of why we do the games, what I love more than that is figuring out, wait a minute, does this make sense what this historian is saying? Like, how does that fit in with stuff I'm reading from other people? And who's right? And like, what's my sense of what was really happening? And what's my sense of why the war went the way it did? And I love that. And then I love building a game around that as a simulation tool to test my own theories, like and all. So I just want to know, John, like and all, your games impressed me like that they must be an exhaustive amount of research. Can you talk a little about your research?
Well, the thing is, to me, research is secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's absolutely essential for when you're doing a game on military history. But I will come at a project because it kind of the story it tells interests me, and then I'll do as much research as I have to, and it may be a lot, but not a second more in order to serve the needs of the game.
I'm similar.
And yeah, I mean, maybe I'm like, admitting something, but I have designed several games on the same topic. I'm much more interested in looking at something from a different systemic perspective, so
He's on the five bulge games now, Don?
Well,
is
no,
that right?
Danny, three counting the one I helped Danny with.
Danny, how many bulge games did you? 4 or 5 plus the book?
I don't know,
You don't know.
So,
John, how about your maps?
The better question is, what's more valuable?
How about your maps? Don't they take a little bit of time?
Well, actually, your point about being a jeweler, I identify with that more. I think Dunnigan had this idea, like he would pierce through to what's the most important thing, and that's the governing thing, and you should really look at that. And for instance, he told me bulge, is the Indian summer of the German army. Okay, that stuck with me. That's right. So what's the Indian summer of the German army like? But anyway, I love research, so I'm back with that, which is, and I write, and I love reading military history and history, and I write it. That's what I've been doing, and so I've gotten back into games here at the end because, I like them because it's just the same thing Frank's saying, which is, we're reading this history, and you say, well, I think I know what's going on, but it could have easily gone some different way, and I think a lot of big events sometimes turn on small things. And so I love the research. And in fact, my wife calls it, he's doing researchy things because I love it. That's what I enjoy doing. And so you do what you like.
So we had a game designer at SPI named Brenton Osworthy, who was probably the most research obsessed human being I've ever met.
He's written a lot of excellent
Dunnigan
books.
said something to me one time I'll never forget as well. He said to me, I was doing a Civil War game. He said, well, has an OB freak showed up yet? And I said, an OB freak? He said, what are you talking about? He said, our audience, just write a note, say we're researching something, and you'll get all the research coming in your mailbox. And that was true. That turned out to be true because there's two kinds of these freaks. There's map freaks that are convinced that terrain's the only thing that matters. And they'll research to every ford and every little tree on Gettysburg or whatever it is, and they'll let you know what it is. And the order of battle is the same way. There are people that think, if I can only find out exactly who was at this battle, I'll figure out why it happened the way it did. But I'm more like Butterfield.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment?
Well, I would say, so the thing is, and you touched on it beautifully, to me, research, obviously, getting the kinetic history right, who was where and how far does a tank drive and all that stuff, that's important in its own right. But I think that order of battle is important, but understanding when I do a game, I'm trying to come up with my argument about why it came out the way it came out. It's my view of why it happened the way it did. And that means I talk about psychological history. In other words, I'll give you an example. Washington, D.C. I've been and I know you probably did it also, Eric. I've been to most of the forts that surrounded Washington during the Civil War. You know, Fort Stevens was where they even had a fight there after Monocacy and all this stuff. And when you look at a Civil War game, if you just say, okay, I got these great fortresses, I put a couple of guys there and Washington's safe, that captures sort of the kinetic history, right? These are big forts with lots of guns. But Abraham Lincoln knew that it was game over if that capital fell. He felt that that was the most important thing. And every time a general tried to pull that last 35 or 40,000 guys to win a campaign, he said, And it caused a lot of friction with McClellan. It even caused friction with Grant. I mean, he was obsessed about that. And so if you ignore the psychological dimension of history, you've kind of missed at least half of it. I mean, or some major proportion. And so I really focus my research not only on the kinetics of it, which is certainly important, but I want to understand what were they thinking and what was driving their thinking and what were
Mark, I want to brag on you right now. So I have an incredible, distinct memory of when you were at Booz Allen Hamilton early on, and you were doing well, and I said, well, what's the difference between the kind of game work that you do and the kind of game work these Beltway bandits do? And you said dismissively, those guys start with the speed of a bullet and work up. They're convinced if they can figure out the speed of the bullet and how many guns there were, and he said they don't start with a thesis and work down. He said like they can't design games. They don't have an idea how to design a game. So here they are designing games. Speed of a bullet, right? You're doing a central front and you're starting with the speed of a bullet.
Yeah, but you got to remember something about the Pentagon, and it's really true about history. I was saying this to my wife the other day. The only two things that drive human history is sex and money, or both simultaneously. And in the Pentagon, it's all about the money. So when they talk about the speed of the bullet, it's who's getting more budget money is really at the end of that argument. It has nothing to do about nothing else. It's all about
this
the
is
money.
specifically around the game. The game design approach was super bottom up rather than top down. So they didn't take, it was like, and I remember, I'll never forget that conversation. It was like, because we don't do that. Butterfield doesn't do that. None of us do that. Frank doesn't do that. An SPI game designer doesn't do that.
Yeah, going back to Dunnigan's, really strong influence on me, it's if you look at any one of Jim's games, he will drive the history through 2, at most 3 lanes of systems, right? There'll be 1, 2, and then maybe a third sometimes. And the next time he does the game, he might drive it down 3 other lanes, but it's that taking all of the noise and getting it, as Frank said, into this kind of big picture view of what's going on, what's driving the equation. So like one of my favorite Bulge games, I guess Danny's in the dark there, or, one of my favorite Bulge games is Ardennes Offensive, which a lot of people think is and I got to tell you 2 reasons why I like Ardennes Offensive. First off, Redmond, remember, it's a winter battle. Every time I look at a Bulge game with a map that's got green on it, I mean, there's some green, but it looks like it's like the middle of spring. Redmond does this stark, wintry looking map. It looks like the Bulge to me. It just looks like the Bulge. And Dunnigan said it was about the trafficability. So that game has a very strong trafficability dimension. Remember, he also did Bastogne, which has another set of dimensions to it. So he drove the movement model through that trafficability model he came up with, had a decent CRT, and pretty much, and then there's some logistics rules, but that's pretty much the whole game, right? And so it's, you get to, and he also treated the armor as regiments and the infantry as divisions, capturing sort of like the maneuver element in the trafficability thing that he was trying to capture. So it's a great game, and I play it, when I say regularly, I play it every year. I played it at least once. But that's the kind of thing that Jim was doing, and I feel like when I focus on that, I do a better job. I get the noise out, and I do a better job when I think that way.
Well, I have Danny Parker's game right here on the shelf behind me. I just pulled it down a few weeks ago and was looking at it. And to me, it's a perfect example of an SPI game in that it's thesis driven, like you just said, Mark, and it's beautifully laid out. And again, it's green, the map, but the map is incredibly functional. The rules are well written. They leave enough out so it's playable, enough in so it's a simulation. I think it's a masterpiece. It's no coincidence it's been in print for 40 years. No coincidence at all.
A large part of that was credit to John Butterfield, because I think what you're talking about, Battles of the Ardennes, which is John was great in
Battles
terms
for
of
the Ardennes.
working with him, because he said, no, we're not going to do that. Let's,
I
because
did.
yeah, you would say like, oh no, that's great, but because I would get into these thoughts, and I'm still thinking a lot about this, because I agree with the Ancient One. I think the order of battle stuff really doesn't matter that much in terms of getting everything exactly right. It's a lot of the other things that matter a lot.
I
And
second
John was
that.
aware of that relative to working on Battles of the Ardennes. And that game, somebody else contacted me recently and said, I told them, I've spent 5 years now working on this new thing. And he said, well, Battles of the Ardennes is the best game.
Well, to give
And
you
so he's telling me that,
both of you, I think one of my favorite Napoleonic quads, is Napoleon's Last Battle, and you put it all together. That's a great quad. And I think the equivalent is the Ardennes has got that same, you play it in pieces, but you put it all together, it's like magic. I mean, it's just
magic. And also the Battles for the Ardennes has the 1940 scenario, which is great fun. It's great fun, and it's fast.
As long as you're good Belgian.
Like Belgian cavalry, right? Isn't it like a Belgian cavalry?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
It's great.
The Bashers Ardennes.
I agree about the order of battle. I know I've talked with Ardwulf about what I call precision chrome, and it's not my number one priority, and all like that. But I want to say, Mark, what you said about psychology and stuff and Lincoln, I think we think a lot alike, Mark. I was just reading today about the Central Pacific, the start of the Central Pacific campaign in 1943 with Nimitz and his staff at a meeting. And, MacArthur never wanted to be in the Central Pacific at all, all like that. And not even the South Pacific, but that was a little better. But anyhow, Nimitz didn't really want to be in the Central Pacific either, but they had looked at other things. They had looked at actually going through the Kuriles, and they had looked at going straight up to the Philippines and everything. And of course, when they went to Tarawa, they got their ass kicked. So that started to put up a block. Anyhow, this meeting and all like that, what you said about Lincoln, this meeting was Nimitz with Spruance and Turner and all the fleet commanders, also King back in San Francisco. They were all going to discuss one question: should we go to Kwajalein or should we go to the two smaller atolls at all? And everyone had an opinion, and there was a lot of prejudice against the whole idea of the island hopping still, all like that, and all. So anyhow, the book I'm reading is called Nimitz and all like that, and I think it's a great book. Anyhow, he goes all around the table. There was about 14 people there, all of them, many stars, all like that, and they all say, leave Kwajalein alone, all like that. And at the end of the meeting, Nimitz says, okay, so we're decided, we're going for Kwajalein, and all like that. And this guy really impresses me. He's the same guy who said, let's send our only two carriers down to the South Pacific because that's where Rochefort says the Japanese are going to be. Everyone else was against that too, and all. And so what is that? That's psychology. Nimitz is trying to figure out the enemy. He's trying to decide how much risk to take and all like that. He never has enough ships. He never has enough supplies or anything like that. But that's not what guides his decision making. What guides his decision making is, can I get an advantage on the enemy by doing this?
So, Frank, I want to interrupt you for a second and praise you while I've got a chance here. So, just like Dunnigan to me is sequence of play, the genius of looking at the sequence of play. I mean, he did he invented the mechanized move. right? He invented so many things with sequence of plays, but so did you, Frank. And I attribute to you the asymmetrical sequence of play from Wellington's Victory. I got that right out of high school. I played it at home, and that game was a mind-blowing game. And so was Frederick the Great for the same reason. It had this unusual sequence of play, and that to me is and Mark Herman does this all the time. His sequences of play and John's, that's kind of the secret of being a game designer, is looking at the sequence of play and does it represent what's going on. So in Waterloo, the French have a slightly different sequence of play than the British, and it's genius. I
get to tell Waterloo. So I get to the front desk, and the first time I met you, Frank. So I guess your game was about to be shipped, and they gave me a copy to like put up on the wall so we could sell it. And I
forget that it's not going to sell it.
Well, no, it's like put the 4 maps on the wall. It looks beautiful. You know, you remember it's got that brownish, hue to it, a different elevation. Yeah. Beautiful map. And I take some counters and I just like put a little tape on them and I put them on the map. And of course, I hadn't looked at the rules because they didn't have the rules. They only gave me the counters and the maps. I didn't have the whole game. And then Frank comes out, and the first thing he says is, "You screwed it all up. You got the facing wrong. They go into the vertice, not for the flat." I went, "Whoa! Didn't see that coming." And so I immediately fixed it, but he was already yelling at me.
Yeah, this is the person who hates Chrome. Oh. Anyhow, I wanted just for a minute to ask again to see if I can get any reaction. I want to ask, what the hell has either kept you working in this for 40 years or something like that? I have this unusual story whereas in 1982, I left wargaming, and I never paid any attention to any of it. I actually disliked it and all like that. And then 2 years ago, last year in 2022, which is 40 years after I left, I just woke up one day and said, I'm going to finish the Pacific War design that I started in 1982.
You're crazy.
Eric, to what you said.
That's a fantastic story.
Go ahead, Frank.
Okay, so the question I'm going to come to in a minute is, why did that happen? But I just want to say something to Eric because of what you said. I think, and this I learned this first from Dunnigan. Game designers, one of the things that drive us is we do look at the other games. We play the other games. We read the history. When you read the history and you play the other game, something seems off. And you can't sleep it all like that. You can't walk away from that problem, that puzzle, and all like that. And that's the same thing that happened with Dunnigan with Jutland. And when he was first working with Avalon Hill, he was just like any of us, and all like that. He bought an Avalon Hill game and he hated it. And he wrote to him and said, this is all wrong, and all like that. And so they said, can you do it? Can you fix it or something like that? And Dunnigan said, I'll do better. I'll design a whole new game, and all like that. So anyhow, just to finish my thought, and then I'd like to hear from everyone else. This question about what is it about games? I said, I grew up in the shadow of World War II, so that had some influence on me. I started designing games to myself around the time Avalon Hill produced Gettysburg. So it's deeply entrenched in my psyche. I mean, since I was a child, I wanted to do this game design stuff and all. But then I kicked the habit and I walked away from it for 40 years, and all. And to me, it's just a mesmerizing question. What the hell drove you back to this after this period? Now, most of you guys have worked much more continuously. So what is it you think, if you have to figure it out, what do you think is the reason why you're more or less addicted to this?
Yeah, we got it. So I just say that I've been mostly a player. I left Victory Games because I had to get into the microcomputer industry. I had to. So that's what I did. It was just a burgeoning thing that I just had to get into it. And that has absorbed my life for a long time. I did start a game company in 2011 to do iPad games, which we had some success and they're still out there. But I never stopped playing. I never stopped buying them. I never stopped reading rules. I carry an iPad that has over 300 rule books on it at any given time. So I'm obsessed with, and I can play a game, and Mark Herman can attest. I've watched Mark do this. If you watch Mark Herman read a rule book, he plays the game, and John does too. He plays the game in his head as he's reading the rule book. And Redmond told me about that. Redmond said, I can just read a rule book and I know how long it's going to take. And he's like, you do what? But at this point in my life, I've read enough rule books that I can kind of do the same thing. And I'm obsessed by game systems. I'm fascinated by the way game designers think, right? And so I like playing, but I like reading rule books too. And so I keep doing that. I'll always keep doing that.
Yeah. So I got out of wargaming or gaming in general in the mid to late 80s and was out of it until like 2006. So almost 20 years. And what brought me back in was one, my kids getting a little older. And then the death of Redmond really made me think about the impact he had on my life and what I loved about the creative process that I was involved in when I was designing games. And I decided I wanted to get back to that. And at the same time, I read Joe Balkowski's book on Omaha Beach. And that book was so inspiring because I realized when I read it that there's no game that comes close to telling the story of what happened at Omaha Beach. And no one's tried to do that really. And so that got me, designing that game on Omaha Beach that you mentioned, Eric. And then once I got back into it, just the process of creating something out of history that people can sit down and share together and the story it tells, I just love it. I just love it. And I just want to keep making them.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
What, Danny?
Yeah. So I would say the thing that Frank said about playing somebody else's game and finding it wanting in some fashion, I have the experience of playing your own and saying there's something wanting. And I'm still doing
do it again.
And actually, sitting at SPI, talking about Wellington's victory and attrition for hours, we discussed this about what it must have been like. And we were both interested in Keegan's book, Face of Battle, which had just come out. We were talking about this. And I'm still thinking about this. So this idea about attrition, and then what is attrition like in games versus what actually happened in history? And there's really a big difference. And I'm still exploring that. So, and I, just like John saying, I love it. And I would like to chime in on something that I haven't mentioned, which is when I was at SPI numerous times late at night when I would be there, I found Redmond such a gracious, kind person. I mean, and also he was infinitely quirky. He would suddenly come up with something. What do you think about this? And it's like, what? So, he would have all these unusual ideas for graphic stuff.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, he was really he was a creative person where he couldn't help himself, I think, but be creative. And I think the people that are here, that's a large part of what's going on with each of us. We can't help but love this. And so we can't stop the creativity process. Like I've written history, but that's nice to do. But then when you get back to looking at games where you realize things turn on small events, then you think, well, exactly what's going on here. So, and could we make that something enjoyable? And the answer is yes, we can make that something very enjoyable.
I would offer, for me, obviously I've read, I have that, just like everybody here, I've read thousands of his military history books. So, and I got a lot of knowledge, a couple of deep knowledge in some various areas. But for me, war games are an alternate way to understand and relate to history. That to me is what has always kept me fascinated. And as everybody knows, I actually never left war game design ever. But what happened for me was well, you saw my wife. Everybody here knows her, obviously, from when we were much younger. In fact, my daughter Lara was the first baby born in the first year of Victory Games. If you guys remember when she was born,
Yeah.
and she just had her second. She's 39 now, and she just had I had another granddaughter born like 6 weeks ago.
Woohoo!
So yeah, Claire's here, and so life goes on, and when I look back on that whole experience and what drove me at some point was, remember I said sex and money, right? So in this case it's money. I mean, I got married to the other thing, but the money part meant I needed to make more money because I had this daughter all of a sudden. You guys were still single or just barely married, and so Next War got me an opportunity to go work down in Washington D.C. and my salary went up. I was hoping Hessel would be here so I could complain that he was still paying me minimum wage when I left. But, I got a big raise just to go work in Washington. And my wargaming skills, I was able to use them in a different way. It made me unique to them. But my father, I was a good businessman, and I just always was. And so I was able to build a very, very large business for a very large company, which is a good thing if you're trying, and that solved that problem. But that's what drove me there. But even when I was there, I told them when I started that I'm still going to keep publishing war games. And so some of my best war games were done while I was working at Booz Allen.
Mark, I have to interrupt you.
Sure.
I have about a half a dozen important Mark Herman stories in my life.
Oh.
This is number one.
Oh, no.
So Mark was down at Booz Allen in Hamilton. Then he quit, and he came back to SPI.
For a short while.
And here's the story. So we were in the halls of SPI, and it was like, Mark, you're back. It's great to see. What's going on? What happened? Did they make a counteroffer to you when you said? He said yes. They did. They offered to double my salary. And I was like, double your salary? Why didn't you take it? Mark Herman said this: anytime someone gives you an offer that's far above your current worth on the market, never take it, because you'll never be able to leave and they will own you forever. Do you remember this conversation, Mark?
I do, actually.
I never forgot it. And I got one offer like that in my life in my mid-30s. And I remember that conversation, and I said, no, I'm not going to Goldman Sachs. No, thank you.
Anyway,
I wasn't put on earth to do that. I was put on earth to do this, just like you were put on earth to do games, right? Not to be, at that stage.
but I will tell you,
offer.
my biggest successes in my career are a little bit unknown, but I was once on NPR during the Gulf War, and they said, everybody was putting out these numbers. How many casualties the United States? And they would say like 20,000 or 30,000. And first off, does anybody even know what 30,000 the Russians do now? But 30,000 casualties then was like a nutty thing, right? And I said to the lady on NPR radio, I said, look, in a war, casualties go from too many to way too many, and too many is one. So I know for a fact that I kept a couple of humans alive in my time, and that to me was the true value of whatever I accomplished in my lifetime.
That is impressive. I have one person who claims I kept him alive, and I don't believe him.
So back to this question of what do you learn from war games? Here's the thing I remember, John. I don't know if you remember. I can't remember if it was you or maybe Balkowski. But I was working on a map, and I was reading the book, and I was going, wait a minute. The history book is only talking about where these troops went. But you set them up on the map, and it's like, well, why didn't they turn left here? There's a whole area over here they never went. The history books only talk about what the armies did and where they went, not where they could have gone. And that was a big revelation to me. Again, in SPI, I was like, oh, sure. You do the research, and why?
Well, let me just.
That's part of what Mark. To your point about you learn about the history because you look at all aspects about what's around and where they could have gone. Not
Chancellorsville.
If I can just feed on that real quickly. So you guys might not remember, my actual degree is in ancient history. And I've done this thing called the Battle of Kadesh, which was one of the first, the Hittites versus the Egyptians. And the key part, without going into all the details, you can all look it up in a book if you don't know it well, but there's a key part where Ramesses has got the chariot part, right? And if you look at any map, there's like 400 or 500 horses sitting in the middle of a desert. And let me tell you one thing that's not true. Horses cannot survive in the middle of a desert. Horses actually require water all the time, or they'll die in the middle of the desert. And so all the books just ignore the fact, why is he sitting out in the middle of nowhere with all these horses and everything's fine? The answer is, I went back and did a lot of research and I got some archaeological stuff. There was an entire canal irrigation system, and this was a known water source that they had used 3 times in the past. So the Egyptians knew, if you got a lot of horses, you go here. Any map you look in a book, it's got it flat, nothing there, and it's just wrong. And so real research is not about what the book says, but what the hell makes any damn sense. And logistics, horses got to drink water and they got to eat food or they're dead. And that's the thing that gets missed in a lot of these history books. They don't think about, they talk about the narrative, but they don't talk about the reality of why the heck are these horses in the middle of nowhere. And the answer is they were not in the middle of nowhere. We just don't, they didn't portray the accuracy of it. And that's what I feel, falls into what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So let me ask a couple of questions, because I think we're closing in on the end of time here.
Is that the literal end of time, Gary?
It could be. Danny, I'll start with you. Is there an SPI game that you wish you would have worked on?
Oh wow.
Well, I think I really respected Wellington's victory, my exposure to it, and when I saw it, and when I was able to really become familiar with it, I respected it so much that I thought, wow, I would like to have worked on this. And actually, considering Terrible Swift Sword against it, that was an interesting thing for me. It still is an interesting thing for me. And I also still now think about this business of getting in the first salvo in either Napoleonic or Civil War battle is not appreciated the way it should be. And Frank made that kind of clear to me a long time ago, and I thought, well, I really wish I had been involved in this. I do have a kind of a, if you'll indulge me, a kind of a funny Dave Isbury story though to tell, which was when I was at SPI, he was working on To the Green Fields Beyond about Cambrai, and he was desperate to have some. I was going to stay very late that night, and he was desperate to have someone play this thing with him. And so we played it, and there were like, as I recall, there was like 5 or 4 different artillery sequences within that, and it took us forever to get through a turn. And I think by 2 a.m. I think we had gotten through maybe a single turn or something. And I thought, well, this is just awful, that we've ended up here. And he was telling me how great it was. He was so pleased. He was so pleased that we had gotten through this and it was playing just the way he wanted it to. I thought, well, I really need to go to sleep now. So, but anyway.
So I have in terms of the game I would like to work on at SPI, the game that I admired the most and I thought was the most out of the box crazy genius was Empires of the Middle Ages by Jim Dunnigan. That thing was like the most original, mind-blowing game. I don't know what else to compare it to even today.
Still nothing like it.
It was like, oh my gosh. I mean, it took in consideration religion and language and geography and time. And it was like, wow. And the art direction by Redmond was genius too. I can't imagine what that was like to play test. It would have been so cool. What you, John?
Well,
John, what about you?
It seems like everything I designed at SPI was either World War II or science fiction. And I always wanted to get assigned to do a Napoleonic game so that I could do the research and learn something about it. I know that there was a follow-on to Wellington's victory system that Joe did at his issue game, Quatre Bras.
Great game.
And I wish they'd given that to me. Just
Well,
because I would have
what-
enjoyed the process of learning about more about the battle and making it happen.
Yeah, but was there an SPI game that you wished you'd been a playtester on?
That I wish I'd been a playtester on.
Yeah, that's a question.
Oh, I thought I wish you would design. I
No,
misunderstood.
you got the question right. He's asking you a different
No,
question.
Worked on in either
Worked
I
on.
capacity.
would
In
have
any
enjoyed
capacity,
being a
really.
playtester on Next War, but I was working on other things.
Well, thank you. We could have
Yeah.
used you, believe me. The game. I tell you, I mean, Eric hit on a really good game also, but for me, I mean, I copied it. So Battle for Germany for me I had nothing to do with Battle for Germany, but after I saw it, I was like, it kind of like expanded my mind how to think about like unusual situations that could be made interesting because of that technique. And so when I was, so they gave me the John Carter game, and and there's 11 books. One of them is like in Jupiter, but you go to Barsoom, and John Carter's only in like the first 4 books, and then all the other books he shows up like out of a closet or something for 2 seconds with a walk on, and they have all these different characters. And I realized that you didn't want to be a bad guy; you really wanted to be John Carter or one of the good guys, right? But there's no game in that unless it's a race game. But then I realized, oh, Battle for Germany. So now one guy is trying to advance and go after. You gotta save your. It's the same story, right? Your girl gets grabbed, and they're going to do terrible things to her. You can imagine what that is in people's minds in that period of time. And Tarzan / John Carter has to go off and save her. And then it's just sort of like Perils of Pauline. They get shot down by the green guys over the green zone. And, the Martians shoot them down, and there's sword fights and all this kind of nonsense. But at the end of the day, your opponent is there to slow you down, and that's their job. So they get to do all these heinous things to you. You get to be a bad guy, but you only win by being a good guy. So that Battle for Germany technique to me was brilliant. So that was the game I would have liked to have worked on, but in essence I did by copying it for John Carter.
Frank, what game would you have wanted to work on?
This is an easy question for me. I'll just start by saying I'm currently obsessed with the Pacific War, and like I said, I started it in 1982 at Avalon Hill, and I've been working on a game that hopefully will be published this year. But I was very impressed when I worked at SPI by USN and then the War in the Pacific. But the one I really would have liked to work on, and yet I would have had the most criticism of, is Mark's game, Pacific War. Pacific War is the finest game on the Pacific that's ever been done, and yet I don't like it at all. I can make myself really clear. I love everything Mark did, but I can't play it.
You can't recover from this, Frank. You can't recover.
I don't have enough lifespan to play the damn game. So I would have loved to have been there with Mark and say, Mark, I'm bored, I'm tired, and all like that. We got to cut something, and all like that. And all. But the maps are beautiful. The rules are beautiful, even though there's probably some holes in them, but who knows? There's so many rules you never find, and all like that. But it's just a staggering work of both design and research, and I just wish it could be played in less time.
Well, that's why I did Empire of the Sun. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, one last question for everybody, and this is actually a question that was asked in the audience, and I think it's a great question to close out with. A sprightly young designer comes up to you. What advice do you give them?
Want me to start?
Yes, go ahead.
So, find a game system that you like and create a game based on that game system. That's how we all started, right? So, if you like Napoleon War system, then create a new one on a battle that hasn't been done. Start with a known system, because then you'll learn the system inside and out, and you learn to think like a game designer. You'll still have to do terrain analysis, special rules. You have to write rules. You'll have to do R&D research on the teams that are there playing, fighting. It gets you in the game. That's what I recommend.
Danny?
So I would say read, decide what you're really interested in. So to do a good job, you have to really love it. And everybody that's on here, that's what we're talking about. We find a topic or things that we really love, and that's the way you're going to do something that's really extraordinary. So then you read, you dose yourself with whatever you can that you can find, and then you compare those accounts. Then after while doing that, then you find game systems, all the game systems that you can play and find out about on that, and then expose yourself to those to some extent, and then do critical thinking associated with that. How does that seem like that's fitting the idea that you've come up with from reading these accounts? Is there some central thesis that you can develop and turn into something that'll be interesting to play and learn from for others? So that would be my advice.
John, what do you say?
I would say so. This is a young designer. They probably have some dream of something they want to do. I would just say, just do it. Get out some paper and cardboard and put it together, and then we'll push it around.
I have somebody specific in mind, in fact.
All right.
So and that's the person that actually asked the question. Mark, what do you tell to the aspiring young designer that comes up?
So I'm going to just feed off of the solid advice that John just gave. So the thing, and Eric mentioned it earlier, design is the fun and easy part and should probably take no more than a week. And in that week, you should design 4 or 5 versions of something and play it on a small map and move some counters and see what it actually does. Because there's nothing like doing it. It's a game. It's an interactive thing. And then once you get to that part, then comes the real work. And again, developing a design is real work is. And that's the real work. So I would say to anybody new is don't think about it too long. Just put something down, which is what John was basically saying, and see if it works. And if it's
the Dunnigan method.
And also, by the way, after you put a game down, what I always do is I say, okay, what did I like about it, and what did I hate about it? And if I liked something, I keep that, and I dump the other stuff, and I go do another version of it until I like all of it. So that's to my basic advice to a new designer, and then do the hard work of actually finishing a game, which, by the way, is stopping 99% of all people from being game designers.
Frank?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead. Yeah, let's hear from Frank.
Frank hasn't gone yet.
Frank, what advice do you have for the new game designer?
First, I have to say, I think the real sprightly young person is you, Ardwulf.
Well,
and I know you're secretly harboring a desire to become a designer.
Don't worry, I'll never finish it.
And I do encourage you. It's not that hard. You just need 40 years or so.
Right.
And I do want to answer your question, for me, I would answer this way. I would tell that young designer, get yourself 2 friends, a male friend and a girlfriend, and play the games with both of them and all like that. I think I mentioned that my first date with my wife, who I've lived with for 45 years, we played Flight of the Goblin and all like that.
Oh, romantic.
Oh my God.
Oh, that touches my heart.
Wow.
And she beat me and all like that. But the other side of it is, so what I'm saying is, there's a lasting relationship with someone who understands why you love games and someone who tolerates that. But I also mentioned having a male friend. When I was a kid, starting in kindergarten, I had a friend who lived a couple of doors down and all like that. And I would never have been a game designer if it wasn't for this person. His name is Gary Sprague. He owns a company out in San Luis Obispo and all like that. But the point is this, he and I got together and bought paper and bought shirt cardboards and got pencils and rulers and got a big brown piece of paper stretched it out on his living room floor, ruled it into squares, and decided then and there we were going to do better than Blitzkrieg or Tactics 2. And that guy shared that passion. He shared that interest and that passion for making a game like it all. And whatever I said, he said that you're a genius. Let's do that, like and all like that. So again, the relationship that got me invested in this, those two relationships. So what I'm saying is the person should have a network of people that are really important to him that he can also enjoy other aspects of life with, but they share respect for what he's interested in.
I want to say my first game design I ever did was when I was in high school, or shortly after high school. Modern Battles came out, which is an SPI game. So I got a blank counter sheet, and I got an Exxon map from the Exxon station, and I put it on the wall. I put it up on the window, and I made a war game map of Dallas, Texas. And I created counters as if the modern Mexican army, whoever they were, I just made them up, had invaded Texas and was now invading Dallas. We played this with our friends, and it was fun. We're driving tanks around.
That game was featured in the last Trump rally, I think.
There you go. Yeah. Oh no!
Coming soon.
Worse. It could have been Flight of the Goban, I guess. But the thing I'll never forget, Redmond Simonson said something to me one time that I'll never forget. He said, a professional game designer knows the complexity level before they start the game. You design, you decide, and you don't vary. If it's a medium level complexity game, it can't drift high. If it's low, it can't drift medium or high. And most games, the longer in the development, the more complicated they get. So he said, no, professional. And he enforced this by rules, right, John? He'd say, you got 8 pages. You can only make a medium complexity game in 8 pages, right? So, but so if you're a beginner, choose your complexity level first and stick to it.
Well, I guess, one of my design mantras is, if there's an issue with the game, something that's not working, don't think about what to add to fix it. Think about what to take away to fix it.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
That's good advice.
Yeah,
in
fact, I just handed in the first final draft of the Rebel Fury rules today to Kai Jensen, and about a month ago, whatever was going on with the artillery rules I had added in, I took them all out. Couple of numbers, beautiful.
Yeah. So if we're closing, we didn't really talk about SPI as a family, and it really was. And I just wanted to close by, it was a microcosm of a large company. It had every department that a large company would have, but each department was 2 or 3 people. But the family part was so important to me, and I'll never forget it. And I know when SPI died, there were a lot of tears because the family had to fall apart. But prior to that, we were really together. We were in a publisher softball league in New York City. So some of my fondest memories are going up to Central Park on a warm summer evening.
Hessel ran that.
What? Pardon?
Brad Hessel ran our.
Yeah, and Brad Hessel organized that and ran it, and we just had it was co-ed. We just had the greatest time playing other publishers in Central Park, and then afterwards going out for burgers and beer, and you can't beat that.
And by the way, just to remind you all,
so great.
Before, the catcher for the team was just in here.
Oh,
so I played first base.
So Mark,
John, huh?
Mark and John, you remember the wake that happened at that bar on 23rd Street next door to the old SPI house?
Yeah,
About 2 weeks ago, I found my negatives. I had forgotten. I photographed that event. I have pictures of both of you.
I want to see them.
Never been published. I've got a picture.
No, you got to
I'm
publish
sorry
them.
I didn't get a picture of Redmond dancing. Unfortunately, because he danced like he
Well, I
dances
expect to see
like
those
Elvis, right? But I
found
those pictures just recently.
By the way, so one thing, Ardwulf, John was talking about the family. So the Shandon, which was the name of the place.
Oh, yeah, the
bar,
bar.
and it had like a good lunch buffet thing, which was fairly cheap, and it was like half a block away from the office. And Irad Hardy at that time was, imbibing a lot. And when I was doing October War, I used to do a lot of my rules editing with Irad at the bar because that's where he was. So I would write my rules, and I walk down to the Shannon, get lunch, and give him the rules, and he would edit them at the bar. I'd take them back.
Shannon.
It was like a
Oh,
shuttle
man.
service. And then later on, I was working with, I was in his office, and Brad Hessel and I were working on something. And so Brad was getting bored of getting up from his desk, coming around just a little bit and coming to my little office. So he cut a hole in the wall. So where his desk was right next to mine now. And he would go, look at this. And so we just cut a hole in the wall. So that was kind of like a little bit of the SPI way.
SPI was an extraordinary family. I haven't talked to these guys in 50 years. And I sent them an email and said, we're going to do a show on the history of SPI. Do you want to be part of it? These guys left at the chance so I can all like that, because SPI really meant something to each of us. And we hope we conveyed some of that to the people who are watching.
Yeah, it means something to thousands and thousands of people all over the world at SPI. I don't know how Jim and Redmond created this culture, this audience, this. I mean, when I was in high school, I chose the college that I went to because it was near SPI. I could have gone to San Francisco. I could have gone to. No, SPI was in New York.
Well,
I wanted to be there.
Jim was very much into the researching and knowing about the Middle Ages, and he told me he looked at SPI as the guild model. It was a guild, and we were, I was an apprentice when I got there, and he got to be a journeyman and a master someday. So Jim and Redmond taught me, and then of course the experience with all the other people on this and other people that we've mentioned, that interaction. But fundamentally, Jim and Redmond taught me how to be a game designer. What was important and how to do it, and and I've been doing it. I can't even say what that's meant to my life. So, but there it is. Without them, I would not be doing this.
When Jim told me to just go ahead and come to New York and work at doing this, I said, well, I really want to study this. I want to study the art densification. And he said, come on and do it. And then I said, well, now maybe I want to write about it. He said, do that. So, so you have these people that just said, come ahead and do what you're dreaming about doing. And all of us, I think our life changed because we get some encouragement.
Jim Dunnigan would say anyone can be a game designer, and he believed that. It's not true, by the way, but he believed it. So when he saw you, he would believe that.
Well, what he said was,
game designer.
He said everybody's got one game in them. That's what he did say.
Yeah, I mean, he basically said, yeah, everybody has at least one game. Everybody can design a game, and that's a liberating thing to encounter your hero to say you can actually do this.
That explains
why the Alamo.
That explains why I designed so few. I only had one.
At least two, Frank. At least two.
By the way, Frank, just send me an email. You gotta come on this, Frederick. I've been defending Frederick the Great CRT for about 35 years now. I need you at this point, so give me an email. I'll send you there. You can fight your own battle from now on.
Anyhow, I just want to say my final remark is that I came back after 40 years. I thought no one would know who I was. I thought no one would be interested in any design I would put out, that I was a relic and all like that.
Frank Davis has called me. I'm here.
But what I want to say is everyone, including all the hobby gamers and all the people in all the companies that didn't exist when I was a designer and all like that, everyone has been so gracious. Roger McGowan, everyone wrote to me, Isby, Bruce Milligan at Avalon Hill. They all wrote to me with these strange stories. Like Milligan said, last time I talked to you, you said you were ordering Chinese food and you would call me back. And that was 40 years ago. But what I'm saying is everyone welcomed me back. They made me feel like I belong to a family, like what John is saying, more than any other place I ever worked, even
Yeah.
though I was away from it for 40 years.
Yeah.
All right, I'd love to thank everybody for coming tonight, especially the esteemed folks that have agreed to participate in this. I don't know if we covered a lot of SPI's history, but I think we have given folks kind of a little bit of a sense of what it was like to be there, and that was kind of the bigger goal. I mean, the history is going to be a bigger work than we're going to get done in an hour and a half video. And I'd like to thank Frank for doing the really all the work of setting this up, because I talked to a couple of people and they said no. So Frank's say so enabled this thing to happen.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Frank.
Yes,
Frank,
thank
I'll
you,
always show
Frank.
up for you, Frank. You know that.
You're my hero.
Frank, we
dude.
all appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary, for giving us this time.
Yeah, and
together.
I hope we're going to be able to do this again and have everybody back on at some point, and we could maybe talk individually too. That would be great. And I'd like to thank everybody for watching, for joining us tonight for this very special show. Everybody have a great night.